Hospitals that have led the way, that are the big, well, I think of, for instance, Baptist in Pensacola, that it looks like they're going to win the Baldrige now. They've won just virtually everything. These who have led the way, we'll say, in the kind of things we're talking about. Here's how they did it. They went from poor to very good. I won't quite give them great. I won't quite give them that. But they went from poor to very good at least, which in my thinking would be like going from the 14th percentile in overall patient satisfaction on a reputable database like Press Ganey and go all the way to the 99th percentile in about 2 years. You'd have to say that is a dramatic leap. That's going from poor to the top. That's one. Number two, the CEO and the board created a burning platform under the organization, which every manager and the CEO sat on or stood on, which basically said if this doesn't change dramatically in 1 year, the CEO's out of work. Well, they didn't even wait. When they've got their first quarterly reports, they fired a couple of CEOs at Baptist. So the Quentin Studer, who's gotten the credit for turning around Baptist for doing this, Quentin Studer came from a hospital that had done this, and he was a vice president there, which was in Chicago. So he goes to Baptist. 3 people have been fired in front of him, just boom, 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 by the board, so that everybody knows now the board is totally serious here. They're going to keep working it until you get a person. Well, if you're on a burning platform as the CEO and you have only 6 months to turn this place around, what are you going to do to everybody else in the organization? They all got only 6 months too. You see what I'm saying? And you'll fire them before you leave if it takes that, because you're going to get these results. That's how it was done, basically. The third thing it took was that they focused on weekly progress, because if you're on a 6-month to 1 year total turnaround, quarterly reports are just about useless as a measure, because you have to wait 3 or 4 months to find out how you did 3 months ago or how you're doing. So if you're in a panic on a burning platform, you'd better have these scores just coming at you every week, up there, posted. Everybody knows how we're doing. Everybody's on a burning platform. If we don't put this fire out, we're all going down the tubes. If you can create that kind of a crisis in an organization, yeah, you can make some tremendous acceleration in this. Now, here's the interesting part. A lot of people left or were fired based on that approach. Left from the pressure, left because they weren't on board. A lot of people were. But who was left that made it through and became the best? We're back to that notion of excellence again. There is nothing like excellence that builds morale. Terrible morale in the beginning as you made this leap, except for those people who are gung-ho and say, yes, we can do it, as good riddance to so-and-so, even though they quit, whatever it is. They were a detriment to where we're trying to go, whatever that was. So when you look at that, then this is the natural following question. If you, in this hospital, are not in a crisis over this, what is going to motivate you? Because I didn't come in here, Meg isn't still here, is she? See, I've said the things that, would make Megan panic probably. I didn't come in here to suggest that you be placed on a burning platform. But I will suggest this, that in order to make the kind of improvement that takes you to where these people get, it is just as much work, and there's going to have to be just as much change on the part of some people as there is when you're going from a crisis. You see what I'm saying? But you shouldn't have to create a burning platform to do that. I don't advocate that, especially in a place like this. You're already head and shoulders above everybody in your database. Or at least you're right at the top of that. That's wonderful. So you're not in a crisis. The only thing I can think is, can you inspire each other? Will you have enough courage to talk to people one-on-one that need talking to? See, if you create a burning platform, you don't have to talk to anybody. They know. Jig's up. See? If you don't have a burning platform, how do you make sure that this person here, who is a real detractor, is getting a clear, strong message that that won't be tolerated for very long. If they're not on board now, when will they be on board? And if they're not going to get on board, then something has to change. See what I'm saying? So instead of creating a burning platform from everybody, I think that those of you who are really trying to make a change need to have the courage to speak one-on-one with those people who are detractors for what we're trying to accomplish. Any questions about that scenario there? Because I didn't come here this morning, certainly, to scare anybody about being on a burning platform. You folks are too good to need that. And not only do you may not need it. When I leave here is I'm hoping for this. Enough enthusiasm for what we talked about to have some genuine conversations that go on and on that keep making it better and better. Instead of, we talked about it here, we went back, nothing. No one talked about it again. That would be the disappointment. See, no one talked about it again. And some of you have already said to me, I'm going to try the huddle thing, which allows you to talk about it every day with your staff. And where you have a staff that you could huddle nicely with, why not try this? In fact, at my wife's hospital, they found a dramatic difference in communication. If anybody puts communication down as a problem between departments, which came up yesterday, she found in their organization, they found, and she's here to talk about it, and she's not going to want me to call on her. I promised I wouldn't, and I can't see her back there. But, honey, tell the group what the team meeting that happens every morning at 8 o'clock at your organization.
We meet every morning at 8 o'clock. X-ray, lab, ED, inpatient, the day supervisor, maybe a nurse manager, someone from surgery, registration, and try to get there on time, make it short and sweet. And we find out how's the staffing in your department so we can be a little bit more gentle if we find out registration is down 3 today. Is the CT up and running? How are the MRIs? How's the backup in the ED? How's the wait? Because our ED was extremely busy and always backed up. And nursing, did it look like we were going to be able to clear? How's the staffing? Are we well staffed? Could we possibly loan outpatient a nurse? They're short today. We know someone who was wanting work extra if we could give it to them. One morning someone had a very large patient that needed the CT. What was their girth? That won't fit in ours. Let's arrange for an open MRI. MRI. Let's arrange for an open one for that person at the other end of town because they won't fit in. So it's a way of, and it was amazing because you never get to know the people in the lab. They're the scientific introverts, and getting to know them a little bit is great. Getting to know the patient registration, ED listening to how jammed the ICU is. We think we'll be able to downgrade. We've been trying to get the doctors. We'll get them out. We'll get your 2 codes from the ED in the ICU. So it was coming together and a melding, and we made good friends of that team. And if you can alternate when you're not there, send someone else, they get included. You do feel a little more special, and it was a good summing up for what do we think we've got going for the day.
Yes. And that's at a little different level than we're talking about at the individual unit level, but that same principle applies. You know, you can have a huddle of some key departments that are impacted dramatically by inpatients and outpatients that are filling up the system. And so and you know, when you think about all the time wasted with an email and telephone tag, you just give that up. But if you meet quickly and you get these things said and you know what everybody's crisis is, it's just like that. It's much quicker, much more communication at a much quicker level than any other way you could be doing that from your office. Overcoming inertia is what we're talking about. When you ask these questions, how do we do this? We're talking about that. So I'm going to give you a formula for overcoming inertia. This formula is from, I took the Baldrige Examiners Training Program. I didn't become a Baldrige Examiner. I have two good friends who are Baldrige Examiners that are part of Fred Lee and Associates, the associate side of it. And I just spent 3 days with one of these ex-Baldrige Examiners who's writing a book. And we learned from a person named Martin Stankert, who was the big leader of process improvement for Motorola. And he uses this formula that I'm going to share with you. And I like it. I like the 3 elements in here. It's already in yours. But the first element is having a certain dissatisfaction with as is. Well, so when you say, if we're not in a crisis, you're going to have to ask, how do we still create dissatisfaction for how things are without making it sound like they're terrible on the one hand, but without also having people say, well, if there's nothing wrong with it, why are you after us? You know, it's like, and so that has to start. Without any dissatisfaction with that is, how do you even go? How would you lose weight if you had no dissatisfaction with as is? You'd never lose weight. Number 2, there needs to be a vision of what could be. You have to believe that this department, not only are we dissatisfied, but we truly believe with this group of people, we could be this. See? And I like these little words, as is and could be. That's what this person supplied to my thinking that I really liked. Plus, knowing how to, and that's what I was here for. And here's the difference between what my message has been to you now versus what my message would have been to you 10 years ago. The difference was this. I would have thought in the past that it was my job to tell you how to do it. And I've discovered that that isn't how it works. It's my job to offer hope you can do it, number 1. And number 2, some principles to have the conversations around that allow you to change the thinking. Because when you change the thinking, people will do the how-to. See? It's as if saying, I'm not going to tell you how to change your quarterly employee of the quarter system. I'm not here to tell you how it should be done or not. I'm really here to ask some principles that allow you to discuss your own program and say, does this fit or does this not fit? If we did this, what would happen? See, that's where we have to be involved at the how-to level. We're all involved at that level. But you'll never get to the how-to level unless you're dissatisfied, you have a vision, and then you can close this gap between your vision and where you are with the how-to if you have some good principles that you're going to operate on. And our principles are, we're creating a great experience for our patients. That's our number 1 criteria here, is how good can that be and how much better can we be than anybody else at that. And that's going to be our supremes. And we start with that, and then we start with what that means to hiring and everything else. This all has to, however, still be greater than organizational inertia, see? Even that has to be greater, and I love that sign, has to be greater than. It's not equal. It has to actually be greater than. Equal, nothing happens. You know, it's balanced. And so that's why these scales. Here's the inertia. All of this has to stack up over here in order to get this comfort zone, force of habit, to move. That's the psychological thinking if you want to know where do I go from here. I'm not going to tell you how to go from here. I'm just tell you this is the thinking I think can help you go where you want to go. So if we're going to create dissatisfaction, I think the best way to create some dissatisfaction is to methodically track some kind of feedback. Because it's just as if, you played golf and never kept track of how many strokes you had. That would just not be the same as tracking. Now, I've learned that hospital people have, especially I think in nursing, there's this, what do I do about measurement? Now, nursing, I think, is already getting measured on patient satisfaction pretty much by Gallup. What I'm more concerned with are those people who right now have no kind of measures whatsoever, track no feedback whatsoever from who they serve internally. So my thinking is more right now for our internal customer and our internal departments. And I would have to ask, if you want to get better, and a vision for what could be, the next thing is to decide as we try to make this journey, how will we measure, how do we get some kind of feedback data that we will track so that we can say, well, here we are today, and we hope it'll go up like this. I believe that should be the responsibility of every manager who wants to make incremental improvement, whether it is process improvement or whether it is attitudinal improvement, or what you say or whatever it is. This principle still applies. We do know that the measures for process are so much easier and concrete than the measure of perceptions. I do know that. It makes it much more difficult. So when we talk about measuring, however, I wanted to share this with you. I like this because it puts these things in this order. The overarching purpose of measurement should be to help a team rather than top management gauge its progress. So that's how you would present it to your team. This is not about what Meg wants, and it is certainly not about what our corporate structure wants. Corporate is never even going to know whether we're measuring anyway. That's not our purpose here. Our purpose is we're a great team, but could we be better? Then you ask your team, what might we measure that we could get better on and we could be proud of if we achieved it? See how that works? It's a team thing. Not doing it because the CEO requires it or is even going to necessarily look at it. We're doing it why? Because you want to be the best possible coach for a team that's going to be the best possible team. That's the only reason you need, isn't it? You need somebody else to decide that you've got to measure. See? Number 2, an empowered team, that means your team now is empowered to make this happen, must play the lead role in designing its own measurement system. So it's not one you think up, and it's not one you go to Baptist and bring straight from Baptist. You might show them one from Baptist and say, would this work for us? But the point is the team gets to say, this would work, this doesn't work. These questions are good, these questions are not good. Number 3, a team should adopt only a handful of measures. Not talking about something really complicated. And this kind of goes against my grain right now to do this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you some measures that can prime the pump for most internal departments. You can just write them right on this slide, right underneath this team should adopt only a few. Here's a couple that I think of. Timeliness. You know how quick, that's turnaround. You want to put it around parentheses. Turnaround time. Are you a timely department? You quickly turn around a work order. You're right back out there taking care of it. That's number 1, timeliness. Number 2, I think, as a good way of determining a team is reliability. This is a good measure. Are we reliable? When you call us, do you really well count on us, or do half the time you have to call again 2 or 3 times before you make an impression on our department? See, that's reliability. It's different than timeliness. Reliability is consistency. Timeliness is quickness, turnaround. Quicker the better, quicker the better. See. Ease of interaction would be another one. How easy is it to get? Another word for that, in parentheses, you might put responsiveness. Ease of interaction means it's really easy to get a hold of you. It's really good. It's easy for me to deal with you. It's easy to read your reports. It's easy to understand how to fill out a form when you give it to me. And so ease of use and ease of interaction, ease of dealing with the department is a nice critical dimension on which you could be tracking how you could be better. And then not to leave out courtesy. And you can define it. In our department, courtesy is largely defined by helpfulness. Then you would just say, courtesy in our department largely means being really helpful. It doesn't have to necessarily be smiling. Maybe it's only telephone calls and then you're really helpful. And so I'd put in parentheses, for most internal departments, that would be helpful. So that's to just give you a start as to what are some things that we just have a handful of things we're going to measure on to gauge our success. So now we go to the next page. To help you do this with a team, to help do this with your team, I'm sort of giving you the Monday morning thing you could do after all this stuff we've talked about that's going to be ongoing, never-ending, and global. What are some very specific things that you could go back and get started with? And once you start this path, it gets easier and easier to instead of feeling your way along, you develop confidence and you stand up and you just walk that path and you realize with confidence and with experience, because you learn by doing. I'm afraid people want to learn, and they're afraid to ever do, because until they know every contingency, they're afraid to do. And I want to get you started on a road so that this will help you learn by doing. It turns out reliability doesn't make any sense to our people. We scratch reliability. See, we don't have corporate telling us that you got to measure reliability, and then in our department, reliability makes no sense. We try to bend the scores. See, I'm against all that stuff. I give you some suggestions here. If reliability doesn't fit your department or timeliness, scratch it, Don't try to bend it to fit what you're doing. Preliminary questions. I like some of these. To prime the pump, who are the customers for each service we offer? Because you take Paul, for instance. He can't just have a answer to radiology. It's got to be, well, we have customers of this, we have customers of this, we have certain physicians that are the primary customer of that we do. And so he would have a highly segmented list of services. You see, whereas dietary wouldn't have quite such a segmented. They would have cafeteria, and then they would have delivering trays, and they might segment those two. So first you segment, you get your staff to segment. What are the important segments of our services and customers? That's number one. Then you ask this question to the team. Is it important to our team to meet their needs and wants? We got Dr. So-and-so, the largest user of this. How important is it to meet this doctor's needs? Well, I think, that's that's a bit of a rhetorical question. And then we ask, do we know what those needs are? And the follow-up question is, how do you know we know? Right? Because if you say, how do we know? Then you'd have to say, we're only guessing. There will be no substitute for finally going to Dr. So-and-so and saying, what are your needs? Right? We think they are these. Does that match yours? Well, yeah, I like those. There's one more, however. You see, we have to have needs validated if we're going to do a really good job of this, not just guess them. How can we know we're meeting their needs and wants? Okay, so now we're going to get into our feedback system. You might say, well, we just got to ask him every week. Okay, that'll be our feedback system. See if I'm sticking with that one doctor illustration. It may be calling somebody every week. And after you get the same message after a while, maybe once a month. I don't know. This is for your team to decide, right? It's what makes sense to you and your team. I'd like to get you started on that. Never mind, that I may make a statement or two that doesn't fit. How can we get an accurate picture of our performance? So now we're going to ask, we got the measures, we've validated, how are we going to do some kind of tracking? Okay? Now if we're going to do some tracking, how will we know we've improved? Will we use a number that helps us know we did better now than then? Some departments, that kind of number may not be useful. It may be strictly impressions. You just want that person to say, you guys are great, I can't tell you. And you were not frustrating. You're just wonderful. Well, that's your feedback. Then that's all you come out. Well, we got wonderful again. See, some feedbacks is too easy. Some people are very complex, and it has to be entirely up to the team to decide. How will we use the information for improvement? Now, here's where it gets very important. Why in the world do all that tracking and measuring if you have no plan for how to use this information? In fact, if you want to know the truth, you should probably start here before you do anything else. In other words, I would say, do we want to measure anything or get any feedback? If they say yes, then the next question is, well, how will we use it if we get it? Because I think a plan has to be in place for exactly how you will use feedback before you ever ask anybody for any feedback. Well, that's an exaggeration. You can still get how are we doing and get some complaints. So I scratch that. The point is to set up a whole system, right? When you have no plan for how to use it, the plan probably should come first, or don't start using it. How will we know we are improving? And of course, then we have certain questions that, well, if this is our information we're going to use to improve, we have to ask, is it accurate? Is it timely? Is it easy to understand and use? And that's why I would question, for instance, I would question a survey question about patient care that had nothing about care and compassion, anticipating your needs, or comfort, or comforting. And remember, all those things that are synonyms. If there's no synonym anywhere on that, then I would question, right, whether it's accurate, if we're getting at the right things and so forth. Now, wouldn't that be helpful as guiding questions for a discussion with your staff or your team? This combined with the slide just before it. If you were serious about doing it, I think these provide you a guideline of the kinds of questions to answer. You know, the Baldrige Reward is all about questions. It doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do. It's just questions. And that's what I love about the Baldrige, is that there's nothing prescriptive about it. It just says, is there such a thing as patient satisfaction? Well, yes, there is. Okay, what are you doing about this? What do you do about this? It's just questions like that. Doesn't tell you what to do. You have to come up with the how-to yourself. See? And that's kind of the approach that I'm trying to take here. Anybody have a question on these particular questions? Or a comment? Or is there a little thing missing that would help me tweak this better? That you would say, well, what I don't see in that is this, Fred, and I would love to be able to add something here that I had left out. Okay. Is this too scary? Does this suddenly sound like we were having fun until now? Does it sound like all of a sudden, it went from inspiration to work here? Yes, Mick.
When I've sat down with different teams of people, every once in a while you get somebody in the department that has an agenda, that it's clearly they're trying to say, I think we should do this, so we should measure this, and you can really, as a manager, you can really feel that they're not really interested in real feedback. They're interested in justifying whatever they're after. How do you disarm that issue, Fred, as you're taking your team through this thing?
Well, my first response is to get the team to discuss the question, are we as good as we can possibly be? And then you get them to discuss that. And if they say, well, no, we could still be better, then in what areas could we be better? And get them talking about that. So that you as a manager are part of a discussion. You're not really setting the agenda. And don't put an agenda. You just ask that question. Can we be better? In what ways could we be better? And then you guide part of that discussion because you're one voice in the discussion. And so if nobody is saying anything about patient experience and that's in the back of your mind and they're only thinking of a few things, no, that's easy. You just put that. Well, what about the patient's experience? Oh, yeah, well, that too. You see what I'm saying? And that's the way things get discussed, is that you don't necessarily guide them. But if there's no feeling that they can improve, which is doubtful, right? Then the next question I would think is, would it be fun to become excellent? If we don't feel like we're just really clicking as an excellent team, do you think it'd be fun if we could ever make that happen? That's the way I would lead a discussion. And then the discussion would be around that question. Yes, it would be fun. It would be great. Well, what areas would we need to address first? See? And so I would see us addressing areas of concern probably first, because this is sort of like the next step beyond that. It's like I've talked about all of that, the areas of concern for the 2 days. Now I have moved away from, okay, we care about all these things, so we're all on board. If you can get your team to where we are today, I haven't talked about measurements until today. And then if you can get your team in the same process that I've taken this time with you folks through, which is to start with sort of the inspiring notion of how good we could be and how fun that would be to work together, and then move to what it really means in terms of perceptions and measures and how different perceptions and measures are, which people have to understand. Then you move to, if we're going to get great, should we measure something? See? It's a logical progression, but it should all, I think, be done as much as possible in a discussion environment. We're all in this together, and I need to know how I can help you reach this too. It's not all just me telling you what to do. But you're still the coach. You're still the coach. You can't lose that track of the fact that you bring them to the table. You say, we're going to take our time to discuss this. You talk about what we're going to do. So you're still very much the leader, but it isn't bringing something, setting it in front of them and saying, from now on we're going to use this tool, which I got off the internet. And that approach, I think it's quick, but you don't have the commitment with that kind of approach. Meg, was that?
Yeah, I think you're taking us through the steps of how the conversation might go.
Yes, and these are kinds of questions in the conversation. So if you have these questions in the back of your mind or even on a sheet of paper in front of you, not handed out, because they should evolve. The questions should evolve with the discussion to have a genuine conversation. I'm going to give you a mental model now to help you some more in your thinking about this. This is totally unique. You won't find this in any book anywhere. Of course, you'll find it in my book, but I have had a problem with pillars, as you know, right, as a very useful device, except as strategic planning. Pillars are great for strategic planning at board and executive level. But below that level, I find they're not dynamic enough to say what at least I want to say about the way pieces fit together. They're not pillars with a roof on top. They're much more like what I'm getting to right now. This model that I wanted to share with you, we started it out already. We talked about we have this problem with inertia. We want better performance, and if we're going to be able to measure performance, we can track it better and know if we're improving. So whenever an organization tries to get this kind of improvement, the first thing they usually do is, and you've certainly done this, you set some kind of service standards. We're talking now our field, our area, we're going to use a model. You could use other areas. The model still holds up even if it's on more measurable things than just people's perceptions. But it certainly works with perceptions too. So we communicate these standards. We might put everybody through, I don't mean us now that I'm talking about this, but I'm saying this is typically done. You put everybody through a training program, you call it, or their service excellence program. You share the standards with them, and then you hope, of course, that will help this inertia go up. But after years and years and years of me watching this happen, I can say it is a rare, if ever, that performance goes up from that model right there. It's rare, if ever, that will do it. Because the ability of a trainer in a program to communicate in such a way that anybody will really change is just about zero. Doesn't matter how good they are. You can bring Stephen Covey in himself, who I think is a wonderful speaker, and they'll be motivated for a little while, but it just fizzles about 24 hours. And it's pretty much gone. And by a week later, a month later, and so we've seen this. Some of us have experienced this before, right? With other organizations or maybe even with this organization. And what is lacking in this model right here is this. The lever that makes everything happen is leadership. When leadership is not particularly involved, no training program surely will ever manage to make this happen, even if you have the best trainers in the world. Because a trainer what does a dotted line mean on an organizational chart? We know what a solid line means, right? Report, authority, so forth. What does a dotted line mean? Indirect. No direct authority. Advisory. Consult first, that kind of thing. But certainly there's a relationship, but it has nothing to do with authority. That's why communication here under trainers is a dotted line to the staff. Trainer has no authority over the staff. Trainer tells stories, gives examples, gives out the service standards, does little role plays for them so they know how to do it, teaches them the ballistic curve so they can handle an irate person. Staff can do a lot of teaching, that's true. But as far as real performance happening, they have no authority. Who has the authority? The rest of you do, not trainers. The rest of you do. We're going to call the rest of you in this room, we'll call this whole room leadership. When I use the word leadership, I'm not talking about Meg by herself, certainly, or even the whoever meets once a week around Meg's table to make the major decisions involving finance and relationships with corporate structure and the board and those kinds of things. Not even who I mean primarily by leadership. Once you see how this works, then you can follow that as a department gets on board and other departments begin to get on board, and the CEO also, has some influence on this. As we get on board, this will move. But if nobody gets on board here, the CEO and VPs really can't make it move by themselves. Would you agree with that? They can't make this move. Why? Because it is the individual on the front lines that make it move. Their immediate coach is you. That can happen. Now, it's wonderful when these people at the top walk the walk and talk the talk. And when you come with a request that makes good sense in the name of better patient satisfaction, if not purely safety, they listen. Things like that are helpful. But that's really not the critical piece. Well, it's not the most important piece because there are people who listen and everything like this but can't really get anybody beneath them to grab on and take hold without threatening them, and they hate to threaten them unless you're Quentin Studer, and then you're on or off, and you're off the bus or not, you see, because we're going a certain direction. And we're not advocating taking a high-handed approach like that. I mean, I'm certainly not advocating that. And do you know it can start in any department? Not only can it start in any department, a department can shine. This is what I've learned in focus groups, doing focus groups in many, many hospitals. Once in a while, I didn't ask it here. I've actually stopped asking this question. And maybe I should start asking it again. Actually, I'm a little uncomfortable with focus groups in the first place. The most important reason for me having a focus groups with you people was to get some information about this culture that I could share with the CEO, but as much for you to meet me as anything else. So that when I stand up in front of you, you had already sat around a table with me. And I feel less like a total stranger to you. And I had listened to you before I asked you to listen to me. That's the most important dynamic for me, my perspective, in having those focus groups in the first place. But what I used to ask in the focus group is, what department around here really shines? What is interesting to me is how different hospitals, it's different departments. That became a surprise, because in the first few focus groups I thought, because they would mention this one, like the first groups I ever did, and they said, I get the impression, well, you know, the people over there in let's say, Central Supply. Central Supply is the biggest frustration in the world. I tell you, they are the ones that drive us nuts. You know, ordering and supplies and stuff like that. Another place they'll say human resources. Another place they'll say dietary. Another place they'll say housekeeping. Another place they'll say engineering. Another place they'll say security. It's amazing to me that one place, a department will be really bad, and another place it'll be really great. So you'll say, what department? I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Later on, I find out a department has been a real struggle with people, and I'll find it's the same department that at another hospital shines. In other words, it isn't any department, except maybe billing, that sort of feels like they never get the glory that comes from what they do, right? Accounts receivable and stuff like that. So maybe I ought to leave them out. But basically, any department can shine or be the drag, or somewhere in between, obviously. It doesn't come with the territory that you're automatically either a star or a drag. It doesn't come with the territory, is what I've been trying to say. I was in a hospital doing some little 90-minute pep talks where frontline staff just came through, and 90 minutes, and the next group came, and I was just doing these all day long, these little sort of what I would call pep talks to the staff. And every time I came out of the room, I kept seeing, it seemed like the same dietary guy pushing a cart with obviously hot trays on, food on it. He's pushing this cart, pushing the cart. And he was always friendly, greeting him. And by the third time, I said, "What's your name?" "Joe." And "Hi, Joe." And I said, "Are you late or early?" Because it was way in the middle of time for meals, It's like, is he late for lunch or early for dinner? Because he's certainly in the middle of the afternoon here, churning along with his cart. And he's been doing this all day. Oh, he laughed. He said, no, I deliver trays all day long. I said, "Oh, how come you deliver trays all day long?" He says, "Well, because we have room service here." I said, "What is room service? What do you mean you got room service for who? The patients? Patients and their families. Anybody, actually." "What do you mean anybody?" "Well, anybody. You need a tray?" I said, I could have a tray in the middle of the afternoon? Sure, I'll bring it right up to the room. Where are you teaching? Well, no, Joe, I didn't need a tray. But is that the way it works here? Yeah, that's the way it works here. What about a nurse? Can a nurse order a tray while she's at work, not have to go to the cafeteria? Of course she can. Really? Day or night? 24 hours? Well, not 24 hours. 7 to 7, though. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., anytime. Any patient, any nurse wants a tray. Not only that, he said, we do it for the doctors, too. Really? In their offices. Their office nurses get trays, too, from us. He says, we're a full-fledged catering service. I said, really? Since when? I love this, since when, And he says, it's about a year and a half now. So I had to find the dietary leader, right? And I had to find out how in the world can a little hospital about this size afford to do that. It's a Vista Hospital, if you want to know, in Louisville, Colorado, in case anybody wants to go check them out. Check out my story. Louisville, Colorado. And so I got a hold of the dietary person, real gung-ho, just wants to be the best, And he had come, I think he had come from a hotel industry where you do have room service pretty much, until 11 o'clock at night or whatever it is. And he went to his CEO and he said, well, you've been saying all this stuff about performance and meeting, exciting the customer and doing what they wish. And he said, I would like to try to offer room service. And the CEO said, well, how did you think you're going to pay for that? And he said, well, here's my thinking. We throw away so many trays that if it weren't for the nurses helping themselves to trays that didn't get delivered to a patient because the patient had already gone home or something like that, or a patient who is in a coma or something isn't going to have a tray, if it weren't for nurses helping themselves for that, we'd have even more, because that's where half the nurses getting their food during the day. He's exaggerating, I'm sure, but the point is, he's basically saying we throw away so much food, but anybody ordering a tray will be getting what they want, the amount they want, and we won't be throwing away food. I have a feeling that, like we learned in the hotel industry, you throw away less food with room service than when you offer buffet food. And so he said, well, we'll try that. Go ahead and try it. I like thinking that somebody has a CEO who will say, okay, we'll try it out. Right? So all we did first was all we did first was with the patients. And then we thought, well, why can't the patient family have a tray too? So we extended it to them. He said, when we did it for patients and their families, we doubled the amount of food preparation that we did. So we doubled our volume and reduced our waste, and the money that we saved from that formula, we paid for the guy pushing the labor that it takes. There's more labor now involved, and we spent that on labor. And we stayed within the same budget per meal as we always were before. We're just doing twice as many meals. So when that was going so smoothly, he went to his CEO again. He says, we could probably take some more capacity here if we did. Isn't it wonderful to have somebody want to take more capacity on? Well, what do you had in mind? He said, well, we had in mind the nurses. Nurses keep saying they don't get these trays anymore that somebody left behind. And so this is all that big plot to punish the nurses. And, this is just to keep us from getting any food. That's why you're doing this. So he says, what if we offered it to nurses? Well, go for it, CEO says. So they went for it. Nurses loved it. That again was 100%, 100% more, and 100% again because of the nurses. So they have now tripled the amount of meals that a hospital their size serves. They now are at a quadruple the size of service because they've opened it up to the physician's office. Now, lucky for them, their physician office building has a weatherproof walkway straight into the office building, and it's those physicians. They're obviously not all the clinics and all of that, but if you can take a tray from the cafeteria and walk without going out into the weather, you are able to order a tray from dietary. 4 times the meals. Now here's the outcome of that. The entire community knows it. They think no other hospital in the world does it. And when you think no other hospital in the world does something, you think you have the best hospital in the world in your community. And you know who sings that tune more than anybody else? The doctors. When the doctor says, you want to know what they're like over there? They give room service even for their nurses. And that's like, wow. Yeah, any department can lead the charge. If they get truly turned on with the questions that we were asking about, are we as great as we can possibly be? That kind of excellence. Well, and then do you think that in that hospital dietary has inspired other departments to get on board too? Of course, you know. Somebody starts shining, other people don't want to be left behind. So it isn't so much going out and finding out who the worst ones are and trying to knock them on the head. All we really have to do is turn loose those of you who have the passion and common sense, obviously, to go with it, right? Although you'd think common sense would say you wouldn't be offering trays to everybody like this department does, and find that it turned out to be costing you no more. That was the interesting thing. I basically went in to say, how in the world can you afford to do this? And to find out that, what do you mean? Well, I can't afford not to, because, you know, that's the same per tray cost as we ever had before. There's more of them, but, you know, it all matches out. So now we have a gap. If we're not careful, we have a gap between knowing and doing. Do you agree that we know more about where we'd like to go than we're actually doing? Yeah. And we probably even know more about how to get there than we're actually doing. And so this is our gap. Over here is the doing, folks, and everything over here is merely knowing. Scores, feedback, data, information, safety, process improvement. All the scoring that we do is all over here. Service standards is knowing what we're supposed to do. Performance reviews is just knowing. Planning is knowing only. Right? The board goes away and they do a plan. They hand you the plan. Nothing has been done yet. But people often think that if they prepare a nice binder and they did a lot of research and they got all the data, Meg, if they got all that on a shelf, they've done something. Well, the truth is they haven't done a thing yet, right? Data is only data when it is only on the knowing side. Data is useful when it turns into something on the doing side. And that's what leadership's all about. Taking what we know and making it happen in your department. Tell me how to lose weight. And here's the question I have. I don't really need to have your answers to that, because let me ask you, what percentage of people who ask, how did you do that? And who purchase books and programs on losing weight, what percentage of those people really already know how to do it? You know, give me a number, somebody. 90%. You say 100%. Well, I kind of like the 95% notion. I give a little more room there. Yeah, right? Well, if that's the case, then what percentage actually do it? So let's rate how many people know how to do and actually do. Give me a number. 20%. Okay, then I'm going to say to you that 90% of managers know how to do it and only 20% do. Same ratio as probably lose weight. Because that's human nature. Our weight losing problem, that is people who say they want to. It isn't a problem with want to now. They still know how and they still don't. So even people who want to, the likelihood they won't is pretty strong because of what? The thing we talked about all along, our normal human inertia. You talk about a staff's inertia, but I can talk about my own personal inertia around losing another 10 pounds. I got a lot of inertia around that still, and a lot of inertia around other things that I wish I was more disciplined about, right? And I put myself in that same category. So what are some knowing things that hospitals do? Well, patient satisfaction scores is knowing, real-time information. So instead of getting a quarterly report, you're checking these things on a weekly basis. Focus groups. I supplied a focus group report. That's merely knowing. That's just information. Planning is just knowing. Task force steering committee. You know, these people give out a lot of information, and I believe in a good steering committee. Be careful who you put on it. Make sure that who you put on it are part of leadership, not trainers, because trainers have no authority. So you want a good steering committee has got authority in there, you know. Chairman of that steering committee comes down and asks you a few questions. You listen. You know, they're not just somebody who has no authority walking around asking people, do you have your measures up yet or whatever. Service coordinator. As coordinator, the problem with a coordinator is this coordinator has no authority over anybody. They can just run around on an advisory basis saying, did you know that you're getting some complaints about such and such? And you're, yes, we know. It's been that way for years. See, that's what I mean here when I say you got a service coordinator. Well, I'd rather have no service coordinator and a whole lot of department turned on and doing their stuff. System of rewards, getting house rules, scripts, redoing job descriptions, redoing performance reviews, posters and bulletin boards. There is value in doing those things, but let's never be confused that they were doing anything except information gathering. Once you take a look at that, then I would like to add, these are the kinds of questions for discussion. It seems to me that when it comes to feedback, we're asking the what. What's important to people, and what is our performance like against those standards? When it's down here about service standards, we're trying to tell people why we have these standards. What are they important for? So the what and the why are the knowing side of things. We know it's important and why it's important and what's important. And I spend a good deal of time making a distinction between what's important for satisfaction is not necessarily the most important things for loyalty. And that's all answering this what and why kinds of questions. When we come over here, however, there's two things involved with doing. You have to want to, like this service director in dietary, want to try something new, want to reach for the stars, and have a management team above him that says, well, then go for it. You know, you've written a plan here. You don't think it's going to cost dramatically more, and let's test it out. Let's test your theory. And so you have a management, upper management team that lets people take risks and fall on their face and say, well, that was sure a bust. We got more complaints now than ever. He was running a big risk by doing that. It's going to cost more complaints than ever. Turns out the nurses were a little upset with it, but he figured out how to fix that without saying the whole system was a bust. See what I'm saying? That kind of culture then leads to that, and if you have the want to, I don't see why we have much problem with how to do it. Shouldn't be much problem with that. Shouldn't have to go anywhere. Of course, I've just taken away the best smokescreen any manager's ever got. Because asking how is a favorite defense against taking action. You have a new CEO. Let me tell you a secret here. And of course, I'm saying this facetiously. And yet there's a lot of truth to it. You've got a good 3 years before you got to do anything. Because you can stall on, well, I don't know how to do it. We never did it before. It's not the way it used to be. And here's the beauty of that theory. The average tenure of a CEO in this size of a hospital is about 3 years. Which means that if you can stall this one out, you can probably stall out the next 4 or 5 and never, ever have to do anything. By constantly saying, well, until you show me how in this department, running with this kind of occupancy, running with these kind of numbers, till you can show me somebody that's doing it in the inner city. See all those excuses? With our acuity, with our non-pay indigence. I mean, the excuses abound, folks, to stall by show me how. Until you show me how, you know, I'm still looking. Send me to Baptist. No, let's trek over to Baptist. And so now we come back with more knowing, you see. But it won't be perfect. We will still have a reason why even Baptist isn't us. And what they do isn't what we can do. And if you want to stall on this for 3 years, you can probably outlive your CEO. But you will never become great. And that's the real point. The illusion is that if we can conduct enough research, please, more focus groups, changes in human systems, the results will be persuasive. My experience is, and this is Peter Block, one of my favorite authors writing here, and his little book, The Answer to How is Yes, is where I'm keying off of my theme right here. And he says in this book, my experience is that the data and measures are not half as persuasive as anecdotes. Of course, that kind of verifies the approach I like to take with you folks, right? How many anecdotes have I told? And not as persuasive as anecdotes. Now, you need real data to make real progress. But as far as getting people excited about progress, anecdotes do it as much. It is these stories. It is reading. It is having a department that says, isn't there one in there about us? And then you dig through and you find, oh yes, there is one in here about your department, and you read a compliment from there. That's the spirit. That's the spirit that's persuasive, see. And then did you find yourself listening as she read those for adjectives? Did I prime you for adjectives? Wasn't it interesting how we just sort of just lumped it all together as a nice little blessing on us, and now we're listening for what adjectives did they use, because that's what we want to emulate. That's what we want to repeat. Anecdotes, personal stories, reminiscences, almost like biblical parables, are the medium through which faith is restored. Faith in the organization, faith in your ability to make progress, faith in all of the things that are so demanding that you will finally conquer some of these things. You know, Meg's already mentioned a serious concern about the kind of surgeries that you do. But there's faith here. We'll overcome this. We'll find out what the root cause is of this drop-off. And we were going to figure out how to fix it because we have that kind of confidence in this organization. And that's priceless. No one can persuade another to change. Each of us guards the gate of change that can only be opened from the inside. We cannot open the gate for another. You know, I wish I could open the gate of change for everybody in the room, but I know I can't. Can't open it for another, either by a good argument or even emotional appeal. Now, I get quite passionate and emotional, but I do know that gate of any kind of change is a firmly controlled door on the inside of everybody in here. Compliance versus commitment. When commitment is needed, I'm going to give you several great statements from authors that are famous for their insights. And so while I don't usually do much of that in the last 2 days, I'm going to leave you with this. So put in your file, go back and look at some of these great statements. When commitment is needed, hierarchical authority becomes a problem. I love that statement because it's so easy for us to say, we need a CEO who leads the way, who role models what we're supposed to do. And if they're not going to role model it, why should I? That means you are looking above you for guidance. And this says that when it comes to true commitment, looking above for hierarchical authority to tell you what to do is a serious problem to commitment. Because committed people act and do. They don't wait to be told. See what I'm saying? Now, this is somebody else saying this. A value is only a value if it's voluntarily chosen. No reward system has ever been invented that people haven't been able to game except those they did and prepared and trusted in themselves. When somebody is doing it to me, I'll figure out a way to game it. But when we as a team want to improve and we set up our own system of measuring us, we have no interest in gaming that because we're interested in honesty for improvement. Totally changes the psychology. So when we look above, when we want people to ram it down our throats, when we want people to tell us what to do, when we want them to come up with our measures, we'll never get commitment. The more strongly hierarchical authority is wielded, actually, the more compliance ends up resulting. Yet there's no substitute for commitment in bringing about deep change. No one can force another to learn if the learning involves deep change in beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. Now, this word change is a highly subjective word. There are many of you in this room that don't need to change. You just need to shine. You just need to take what is in your soul and let it out. And have the courage to help other people let theirs out. It isn't that you're changing anything. And yesterday I thought, I may have planted the change notion too deeply in here. Because if you go out of here and talk about changing the culture, I think you might get some resistance from people who feel this is a darn good culture. So I'd like to caution us on using the word. We use it in here and understand each other perfectly. I think when we go out of this room, let's not use the word change or the word culture even. Just ask people, How can our culture be even better and make people want to work here even more? That's it. Even better is what I'd like you to say instead of change. Not how can we change the culture, how can we get our culture to be even better than it is now, and it is mighty good now, so that people feel that affirmation. But we're talking semantics, but you know the world runs on semantics. The nuances of the words we use make such a big difference in the way people respond to those words. That was Peter Senge. I guess you had that on yours. I love this little model here that starts like this. These are statements I used to go around saying, virtually. No significant change will occur unless it is driven from the top. Quentin Studer certainly showed that. And there's a lot of truth to these. It isn't that they're false. It's just that my thinking has changed so that I wouldn't say this anymore. Another one was there's no point in starting unless the CEO is on board. Another one is nothing will happen without top management buy-in. Those are famous statements. I have a feeling that there's probably no one in this room that hasn't said one of these statements at some time in talking about the stuff that we talked about the last 2 days. So let me show you that while these are true, here are some equally true statements that sound like the opposite. Number one, instead of no significant will change, we could also say little significant change will occur if it is driven from the top. That is equally true. Instead of saying there's no point in starting unless the CEO is on board, the truth is CEO proclamations and programs rolled out from corporate headquarters somewhere are a good way to undermine the deep change that we enjoy when it is invented here, when we did the work, when we put it together. The people at corporate love it. Why? They put it together. They ought to be in love with it. But when you roll it out here and nobody worked on it, how do we expect us to love it? How do they expect us to love it? See? That's why I far prefer to talk about principles so that you can put your own systems into place. Instead of nothing will happen without top management buy-in, how about this? Top management buy-in is a poor substitute for genuine commitment at all levels. If I had to choose between top management buy-in or genuine commitment on the part of you folks in this room, I'll bet on you folks in this room any day to make the great changes or improvements that we've talked about. In fact, it could even make it less likely. The role of top management, while we would like the support of top management, and I sure believe in that, we certainly need the support of top management. However, they also don't want top management telling them what to do, not if you're a really self-motivated, self-directed person. Leaders are those people who walk ahead, who are genuinely committed to deep change in themselves and in their organizations. Can you walk ahead of top management? Top management hasn't quite bought in yet because they don't know quite how to do it. They don't know what to do with the reward system exactly. They have a lot of pondering and thinking to do. Does that mean that you need to stall and wait? No. See, this would suggest that leaders are those who walk ahead, who say our dietary department can shine. We don't have to have an example somewhere else where they've done this. We can take charge and move ahead. I also love this one because my background's in psychology, my graduate work, and consequently I kind of like this kind of thinking here. Waiting for direction leads to dependency. I used to think that dependency was because somebody was too aggressively controlling and forced a dependent relationship. I've now discovered that people who are forcefully controlling know how to find people who love to be controlled. And they know how to make a marriage a perfect marriage of control and submissive doormat. And they get married all the time. Perfect marriage. No fights in this place. Somebody makes every decision. Never have an argument over anything. One's a doormat. One's dependent, one's controlling. There's some of you managers that are probably so controlling that you know exactly how to hire very submissive people who, oh, please don't ask me to make a decision. That's what they paid you the big bucks for. And you can say, that's right, I get the big bucks for making the decisions. And so it all reinforces itself. See, that's one of those marriages of this kind of, well, let me tell you what happens to most of these marriages when they reach middle life and a little bit beyond that. It turns out that the dependent one becomes depressed and has all kinds of mental illnesses. That's why it's such a psychological detriment, not to the controller, but it sure is to the person being controlled. It finally catches up with their human spirit. It finally does its toll. It really does. And the result is the most common form of depression is what psychologists call learned helplessness. You never asserted yourself. You learned to be in a helpless position. We're talking about the marriage now, not necessarily managers. And so that's the extreme. But you know, we can back off of the extreme and say to some degree this is true. Anytime we decide that we will look for direction for above, makes us dependent. It means we are basically in sort of a helpless mode until somebody tells us how to do it and what to do. And then that, of course, gives one nice payoff for us. As Dr. Phil would say, what's the payoff? And we would say, well, Dr. Phil, it's comfortable. I never have to make a decision. It's all top management's fault if something goes wrong. See, because it wasn't me that suggested that. I get off the hook. It's safe. It's never my fault. You know, that's the shield that a rather dependent person hides behind that feels like a safety blanket. Let's change the dynamic. You no longer wait for anything. We're not looking for any guidance. Got enough inspiration, anecdotes, stories, ideas, principles that I can move. And if I can move, I'm no longer dependent. I'm what? I'm autonomous. I'm autonomous. I love that word almost as much as freedom. If you're autonomous and there's nothing to wait for, then you are liberated to think and to act. Liberated. That's all you really need to put in there. But what are you liberated to do? To think for yourself and take action on the principles that the organization has already said is our principles we wish you would live by. And if you do that, here's the payoff. It's a little different. High risk. But you know, that's like skiing down a slope for the first time, right? It's exhilarating, that high risk. You know, I remember when I went up in a it's a parasail with a propeller hanging from it. What do you call that? It's not quite a hang glider. Or what is that called? Do you remember? Power parachuting. It's different than hang gliding, and it's different than lightweight, whatever, ultralights. And the first time I went up in that, you know, that's a little risky, and you're hanging up there in the air and all of that, but you get that high-risk buzz. What buzz do you think that director of dietary got from launching out on this high-risk thing of going out there and trying to do this thing about delivering the meals? But you see the exhilaration that would be behind the potential of what could happen if you just took the risk? And so with that comes high integrity, because you take full responsibility for what happened in your department. You're no longer going to sit around and blame because somebody else told you to do something that's high risk, but it also has high integrity behind it. We love high integrity as well. And then finally, of course, when we have high risk and high integrity, we usually are energized ourselves. And if you are energized yourself, you are a what? An energizer of other people. So, which one of these would you like to be, right, is my rhetorical question. Old paradigm to the new. Here are some words that I'm trying to stop using, although I'm forced to use them to stay within the vocabulary of my audiences. Some of these I've already helped you change, but there's a couple now I would like to suggest. We've already decided we'll change service to what? Experience. So let's put that over there. This is just some key words, concepts. Instead of talking about change and being a change agent, I would like to suggest that values don't change. A student of my, a nurse that worked in my wife's hospital, when he heard that I was writing some stuff in a book, and he knew my topic. He sent me some quotations from Florence Nightingale. 1880, 1860, something like that, over 100 years ago. And the reason he sent them to me, he's basically saying, Fred, what has changed since that? Statements like, never leave a patient without saying when you will be back again. Statements like that. They're still the same. What a patient desires and needs at the level of their emotional well-being has never changed. Now, our technology has helped us meet more of the physical needs, but those emotional needs are still core values that don't change. Starts at the top. I've already started to undermine that notion, I hope, because I'd like you to believe it starts anywhere. So now, if it can start anywhere and it doesn't have to start at the top, then I have a problem with the word leadership. Leadership is a really great buzzword right now. But you know, it's become confused with Jack Welch, Giuliani, whoever it is that's writing the latest leadership book was a leader with a title. And so if you're talking about leadership as everybody's business, then the word leader is too confused with looking above for somebody. And a better word that hasn't probably creeped into our vocabulary yet, but I have a feeling in the next 5 to 10 years it might, is this word instead, citizenship. What is the difference between a leader and a citizen? Well, a leader is somebody who influences other people, but a citizen is somebody who takes responsibility of their own behavior on behalf of the whole. In other words, I give up some of my freedom to act and dress and behave in any old way I want to, and I give some of that up for the sake of the whole society. That's what citizenship is. Nobody told me to do it. Nobody's making me do it. In a free society and a democracy, we really need people who take charge of the core values of society, right? And just act on them. So if you mean that by leadership, then of course that's what I mean. But the word leadership doesn't always mean that to people. They still mean somebody else that tells you kind of what to do. So if we get rid of leadership, now I have a problem with the word empowerment, because what does empowerment mean? Getting somebody giving you some of their power that they can also take back. And we're back to that leader thing, looking above, see? So if we change that, what would we change the word empowerment? Well, if we're talking about citizens instead of leadership, we would say ownership. Citizens who take ownership of our democracy. That's what we're looking for. Take ownership. Same thing in a corporate setting. Citizens who take ownership of the core values of this organization and why we are here and who we serve. Okay, well, if it's ownership, then we no longer have accountability, because what's wrong with the word accountability? See where this goes? We love this word, accountability, but it basically means accountable to who? Somebody up there again. We're back to our leader up there looking for guidance model. So once you change a paradigm, you got to ask, what about all the concepts? Do they really fit anymore? And so instead of accountability now, people take responsibility. If you take ownership, you take responsibility. You're not accountable to anybody except your own ownership of this. It's like if you owned your own business. Do you see how that works? Instead of asking how do you do this, you simply ask what's important and why for everybody. What's important and why for everybody. And then finally, you know the last word here. Instead of then a place where it's all about compliance for leadership, empowerment, and accountability, we would love to work in a place where everybody was what? Committed. Commitment. Now, I admit I'm describing heaven on earth here, right? But I tend to respond to a goal that I will never reach, but I can always strive for. I tend to respond, my personality responds better to that than just incremental okay, this, okay, then this, then this, then this. I just feel like always looking up that way and knowing these are the principles I want to live by are more motivating to me than one small incremental thing as a goal. Now, that's just different personality. Some personalities absolutely thrive on individual goals. So we need both. But the whole point here is either way you think, if you do it all yourself, it's a different culture than when we're always waiting for somebody in authority to tell us what to do. Okay, you remember our last model, right? We have inertia, we have over here. Okay, what is this over here? Did anybody remember? We know what this is, right? The golden bar is what? Leadership. And what is this? Anybody remember? Our service standards, our things that our goal, I think our goals and objectives and our mission statement and our core values, all those things that we sort of teach from that are contained in this. Now, that was just off by the side. Okay, so now what is generally wrong with this picture? If you go ahead, you'll know immediately, of course. But what is wrong with this picture? Okay, so we have something is wrong with the relationship between the fulcrum and the lever and the weight that we call inertia here. And we can improve this picture. The physics of this picture, we can improve if we simply do what? Well, we either shift the load. Now, this would be a dramatic improvement. You take this over here, and it's over here on this side. This whole thing. Wouldn't it be nice if you could take this whole thing and put it there? Then we haven't got any problems whatsoever. Which would be true, even in our model, right? We'd have no inertia if everybody took a leadership position and became a true citizen of the organization, took full responsibility. If you get all of them to do that, we don't even need this model anymore. But we can't. So the other thing we can do is at least do both. We try to get people, we try to enlist people on this side, and we try to close this gap, whatever we might decide that gap is. That would improve the physics of this model. Remember I said, if you thought last section was a little intellectual and often, we're kind of getting up there in this little over our heads, this is where we kind of go overboard. So let's look at this. Going from good to great, I would suggest, is making those kinds of movement. And it would look like this. I would call this in here structure. So if we're going to move the fulcrum closer to where the work is being done, we would have to reduce what? Structure. Too much structure is described as all bureaucracy and no performance. That would be the worst situation. That's what I mean by structure. Anything anybody would say is bureaucratic and slows us down and saps people's energies, and so that they are living by rules instead of by commitment. All of those things that we've sort of balled up like this, I'm just going to call all of that structure getting in the way of real passion and real commitment. So our first step, this keeps slipping every time I do this slide. Developing and dispersing leadership would be the goal. Remember that one of the primary things that they found that you could improve nurse morale was by doing what? Dispersing leadership. Instead of them all over here on inertia and one leader trying to make all the decisions, let's get more of them to make more decision making, to be more involved in the decision making. And that's basically taking people who have inertia and enlisting them on the leadership side of our scale here. And that's called developing and dispersing leadership. That would be the same as moving the weight. Moving the fulcrum would be reducing complexity and breaking down barriers. So far, does this make sense? Because don't you believe that if you reduce complexity, that you're going to have a lot easier time leveraging the work that has to be done? And breaking down barriers is part of that. So when you're looking at this, what am I trying to say to you? I'm trying to say, here's a model that you can look at. You've already made the case that you're the lever here. How do you go from there to there? Well, one way is to consider Dispersing leadership, giving people more power to say yes. Some of those things that we have said before. Getting them on your side of this picture instead of looking to you for direction. So you no longer are looking for direction, but how about your people looking to you for direction? They're the same process. How can you get them? How can you inspire more leadership out of them, or citizenship if you begin to call it that, which I'm not necessarily talking about today. I mean, that's not a word I'm trying to introduce to you, to use with your people anyway. The other thing is to ask people who deal with your department, when I told you to say to another department, what is frustrating about dealing with us? And I say it's the greatest question you could ask another department. Don't ask them, how could I improve my service to you? Ask that question, what are we saying? We get at what? All the things other people say are complex and bureaucratic. We can't ever get you on the phone. What is that about? If we walk down the department, you always have somebody there. How come nobody answers your phone? And so there would be one of the frustrations. What have you done by not answering your phone? You have increased complexity and created barriers. That's the logic here. The more you, and this is a perpetual cycle, right? Because you can't do it all in one time. It's just little bits at a time. A little bit of this, you help develop leadership. Take some time to develop and disperse leadership. You just can't just say you've got leadership to people. They need to learn what that's about. They need to slowly take that responsibility as they can handle it. And reducing complexity is a constant cycle too. So this is the cycle of improvement pictured as a dynamic model instead of pillars that just say improvement as one of the pillars. Well, we get a little more specific. So here we're going to bring some leadership over and less structure in here. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's just look under here. Under leadership, we've already talked about words like commitment. It's more about influence. It's boundaryless thinking. We know our boundary. This is our silo. This is our department. And it's taking responsibility. It's being self-confident. It's having that just do it mentality with people and taking a global view of what we're trying to do. Which is our global view is what again? The patient's experience. How to improve that all the time. See, that's sort of taking a global view instead of just our departmental view. That's what leadership's about. So if you want some key words to think about in terms of how to approach your staff and so forth, these are the concepts that go into that thinking of how do you get more leadership. And then about structure, here are the things that I think to think about in terms of structure. Compliance is usually all set up as a series of structures. If you do this, by this, and so forth, and we have all of these things that have to do with compliance. There's always a threat or a bribe involved. So compliance issues belong here. Things that are just too complex. People are confused. They make mistakes trying to fill out your forms all the time, and you don't correct the forms because they're not easy. That kind of thing. See? Reducing complexity. These silos are part of a structure. Bureaucracy. I don't know if I have the word coming up or not, but it certainly belongs here. Any kind of bureaucracy. Waiting to be told is a kind of structure. Because are you really waiting, or do committees and management demand that you go through all kinds of channels before you get the okay to do what you probably could have done if you had just taken off, but somebody wants you to check with them first. And so that's bureaucracy again. We put bureaucracy in place because we don't trust people to make their own decisions. We don't trust them to make their own decisions because we have not educated them in how to make a decision so that we can trust their judgment. So we withhold the ability to judge for ourselves, I guess because it makes us feel more important, instead of dispersing that kind of judgment so that other people would understand what to do. See, that's all part of our structure. That's the way my management style is structured. You check with me first. But if I can teach you to do what I do, you wouldn't have to check with me first. Have I got the courage to do that? And do I have, if you really want to know, do I have self-confidence enough to do that? I think it takes a much more self-confident person to turn loose than it takes to hold on. To me, a person who is like this with everything and needs control, I say lack of confidence. It's either timidity or insecurity or lack of confidence. You want to hang on, right? If you're insecure, that's what a psychologist would say. First thing a psychologist says with an overly controlling person is that's a very insecure person. That's why the controlling is there. They can't let go and run the risk that something might happen that they either didn't know about or that they wouldn't have approved of, see. Now that's sort of a psychological principle that we don't have time to develop, but this waiting to be told is part of it. Oh, here's our word bureaucracy that I suggested you write down and figured you probably couldn't have spelled, and so you didn't write it down. So there it is. You already have it on yours. I forget that you've got these words ahead of you sometimes, and you're not writing them in. And of course, then incentives belong over here. Did that all make sense? Because, sometimes I've gone out and people say, now that you completely lost me there, Fred. And so I want to just get some feedback here. I tried real hard to describe what I mean by shifting the weight and bringing the fulcrum in and that whole model. It's a dynamic model, and we are used to very static models. And it's the dynamicness of it that makes it feel like it's a little bit, out of hand, chaotic, or whatever it is. And yet it's a very, to me, a very clear and neat model for action. And I hope that it was clear enough to you that it can be helpful to you. Regulations, obviously, are part of structure. My personal metaphor for work, do I have it in there already? I do. Well, I have to tell you that if I were to ask you, when was a time that you loved your work, but it was very hard work, and it was work done with other people? So we eliminate work you did by yourself, which we can take a lot of pride in. So those are the conditions. You worked with other people, and you absolutely loved it, and you all worked very, very hard. This was not a vacation. Okay? Did you ever have an experience like that, either at work or off work or in some project or something? I see quite a few of them nodding. Well, if you were to ask me that question and I nodded, I would be having in my mind a mental picture of when my wife's mother, she passed away at 92, and in her 80s, it was our habit. Her mother had 3 daughters, so it's my wife and her 2 sisters, and their extended families would descend on her home when she was in her 80s. She had a huge garden out back, and she lived just on her Social Security, had nothing else except that her house was paid off. And so she had to live off of that, and we wanted her to be able to live in her little house just as long as she wanted to, which meant she could never, in her 80s, she really couldn't plow a garden and plant all those seeds and get it started, but she could sure keep it up if you got it started for her. So we'd come pouring in and down, and we'd get we'd rent a rototiller, and everybody would divvy up the work, and we worked so hard. I mean, for people who basically are in offices and behind desks, this is truly back-breaking, painful work, I once got burned so bad. The worst burn I ever had came from putting my hand on the motor of the rototiller after it had been running for an hour and a half. It's just like an exhaust pipe of a motorcycle that had been riding 100 miles. So, I mean, just saying that, it wasn't that it was fun in the sense of laying in the sun, and having a margarita or something like that. So that was Grandma's house. We would all descend, and we fixed her house up. We put grab rails where she needed them so that she wouldn't. We removed carpeting that she might trip on. We looked at everything that she did and how she did it to see if it was really safe for her, to make it even safer, getting in and out of the tub and all of those kinds of things. One year we re-roofed part of the roof. Another year we repainted the outside. Another year repainted the inside. All of that upkeep stuff that an 85-year-old, 86-year-old woman could never do by herself. Why? Because we love Grandma. She's lived there for years and years and years. All her neighbors keep an eye out for her. She's in probably the safest place she could possibly be if she just had some help. Now let me ask you, do you think, when I look back on those experiences, they are pure pleasure in spite of the hard work? And that's what I'm talking about. And do you know the other thing? When I look back on it, there was no leader of our group. We descended. We saw what had to be done. We all took responsibility. Somehow it'd come noontime, and I'd be out doing some painting or weeding or rototillering, and somebody blows a whistle or something and says, come in now, and magically somebody else has pitched in, bought groceries, made a huge dinner for everybody, and a big lunch or whatever it is. But everybody did where their talent fit without being told or without being asked. And you know the other thing, we had small children and teenagers and little kids, and they all worked hard, and not once were they ever told to do something for $1. Nobody got paid, not even the children. Nobody got bossed, not even the children. We all pitched in. That's my mental metaphor of work. Work to me, using that metaphor, is achieving an unsurpassed level of joy from hard work with good friends, doing something for someone else that really matters. That was Grandma's house. How close is a healthcare work to that? Something that really matters for somebody else. So if I were to take that metaphor of work, and I'm a manager now, and I think, what would be the metaphor for work that our team would like? And I would get other people to describe the vision of what would be the most ideal work environment for us in this team. I were to do that. Here's how I think I would go about it, just for the fun. It's merely a suggestion. Please don't say, okay, this is my boilerplate, because I hate boilerplates. But just saying what I would do. Here's how I would approach. First, I would understand it's a dream that motivates, not plans, not initiatives, not directives, not extrinsic rewards or punishments. It's not numerical objectives. None of these things were at work at Grandma's house. My dream for my department, if I said it in my words, but I would rather capture it in the words of my team, frankly, would be like this. We dream of working in a department where, thinking of Grandma's house, we feel like friends. Now, Gallup. How many of you have read? Now, I have to put this on your reading list if you haven't read it. First Break All the Rules by Gallup authors. People who worked for Gallup and did a lot of research on employee satisfaction and loyalty. And I love this book. I love what it says to a manager. I think you can really take off with some of the themes in this book. And so I have to recommend that book. I've recommended 2 books, Punished by Rewards. If you're concerned with raising children and about rewards, it's a good book to prod your thinking on that. And this is a nice management book to start with the things we've been talking about. I have many, many other books, of course, that I would love to recommend. But if I snowed you with too many, you wouldn't buy any. Okay, so who feel like good friends is the first statement. And the reason I mentioned the book First Break All the Rules, because in the Q12 Gallup, that's right, you guys are Gallup. Are you doing the Q12 yet? Their employee satisfaction survey? Pardon?
It just showed up on our.
Oh, it just showed up.
Satisfaction survey, so we have to have a meeting so they can explain it.
I see. They're going to explain it to you because they'd love your business in doing this. They telephone your employees, and they do an employee survey off of their telephone questions, and they have 12 questions that they ask employees. The reason I bring this up is this. One of the strangest questions I've ever seen, if you're going to pick the top 12 things that drive employee morale that I would have never thought of to come up with, but evidently their research has validated this out of hundreds of questions that they've tested and tested and tested. There's just thousands of man-hours that have gone into the research here. And so I'm going to believe them because they did all this research, And I still hold some reservation about it, but I'm going to believe them. And that is there's a question on the Q12. And if you're all going to do Gallup Q12 eventually, then I really would buy that book because you might as well understand what it is that raises those scores because that links to their score. Anyway, it's this one. I have a best friend at work. Now, people have taken issue with them saying best. But all of their Q12 questions have an extreme qualifier in them. Best is an extreme qualifier. Not some friends, a friend, or a pretty good friend. It's best, And they make a case for if you don't say best, then on a 5-point scale, you won't get that. They won't know what the 5 means. If you say a friend, how do you do that? See, so a best friend, well, I don't have a best friend, but I have a 4. I have a pretty good friend. See, it helps them with their 5-point scale. But the point is a best friend, and if a person feels like one of their best friends is a person at work, imagine how fun it is to come to work. See? So I would key a little bit off of that by saying we feel like friends who find meaning in our work, together as a team with a shared desire to serve the needs and wants of our customers for the overall success of our organizational goals. That links to everything, don't you think? I mean, I can't think of anything that I would do as a manager that doesn't pretty well fit into one of those statements. If those become our statements that describe the dream for our team, then you can take it apart. And here's how you can take it apart. And I leave this with you. There's a few blanks to put in, but I think it's pretty complete. You can follow straight through here. I dream of working in a department where, and here's the first one, we feel like friends. Well, what you would have to ask your group, what does it take to feel like friends? Well, I think it would take no cliques. Or at least people who are running around together are perfectly open to associating with everybody else and being good friends with other people too. They don't make you feel exclusive and you're out and you're not in. You know, that might be one thing that would come up. See, it would depend on the work group, but you'd have to ask, what makes you feel like we're all friends? And what gets in the way of us being friends? And so you're asking the question in the group, what matters in relationships if we're trying to describe friendship? How can we make new people feel welcome and glad they joined our team? And somebody yesterday asked me, what do I do about long-standing cliques in our department? Do I go to them and try to break them up? And I say, well, no, they get resistive and they're already very powerful. A clique is powerful. That's one of the reasons for a clique. It's not just shared people, but there's a sense of shared security if we are truly a clique. It's going to be pretty hard to do anything against one of us because we're basically one. I think one way to start breaking that down is to have the clique at the table when you say, or say to them, the three people that are the clique, to say to them, I want to make new people feel more welcome in our department. How could you help me do that, see? And so if you start with what a new person feels when they come into the department, you get at that sense that it doesn't take years to feel like friends here. How would we make a new person feel like right away they have all the options of being our friend and that kind of thing? So that's what I'd ask. And I would start by saying, what would we do? Well, when we get a new person, they can brainstorm. Well, let's have a little party. Let's have a potluck. We don't get a new person in this department, but maybe once every 2 or 3 years. Let's really celebrate when we get a new person. That'd make them feel special, and we get to know them right away, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that I would expect to come out of that question. Number 2 on that. Who find meaning in our work. Well, what matters most in work? If you want to know, then you ask people, what do you enjoy doing most? What do you enjoy doing least? If you knew that about every single person who worked for you, couldn't you tailor their assignments better? And if there's something that nobody likes to do and they all hate to do, why would you give that to just one person so that that one person never gets to do what they love to do and everybody else does? Knowing that answer, you may find out that the very thing that you thought everybody hates to do because you hate to do it, it turns out one person loves that. You know, I don't have to deal with people, whatever it is. You know, you don't want to be stuck back in that room doing file, but somebody else may just love doing the filing. That's the point. You wouldn't ever know if you don't ask on a one-to-one basis this question of each person on your team. And you're trying to get at what? You want people to find meaning in their work. See, it links to your dream. That's the point here. Let's take the third element of our dream. Together as a team with a shared desire, and of course it goes on, but a shared goal or whatever it is. How do we get that? I like 2 questions. If you have the courage to do this, then you're off and running. You get your team together and you say to them, I would start over here first. I want to work for a manager. Who? And you just say that to the team, you know. I'm going to leave the room and I want you to brainstorm here and make a list answering this question as many times as makes good sense to you. I want to work for a manager who, and they start putting in the adjectives and things or descriptions that they want. They may get a list of 15 things. They may have only 4. It doesn't matter. This is about your team and their perceptions of a manager. And you're not asking them, am I doing these things? You're just asking them for their ideal. You come back afterwards because you don't need to know who said what, and they show you the list. And if it's got 20 things on it, you say, oh my goodness, this is a very big list. And I was hoping that I would make an evaluation tool where you evaluated me, and that seems like an awful lot. Would there be, let me go through these and see if each one is distinctly clear, or are there some fuzzy overlaps that we could collapse so that I could get this to a more manageable little scale, like maybe 5 or 6 things that really matter the most. And then you can work with them, because no longer do you need to know who said what. Now we can work with, what did you mean by this? And when you say fairness, what are some examples of fairness to you, or what would be unfair to you? See, so fairness, oh, that's what you mean by fairness. And I clarify all of that. And then if I could turn around after that saying, I say, in 3 months, I'm going to concentrate on these things. I hope that I can be really good at all of these. In 3 months, I am going to ask you all to confidentially, without knowing who said what, rate me on these things you said were important. It is your own self-developed 360, basically. The hardest part of the 360, which is the below to the above. Because why? Do you want to be a manager who inspires people to feel like friends, find meaning in their work, and work together as a team? If you really want to do that, then there's no substitute for knowing how they perceive you in a non-threatening way to them so that they will be honest. It takes a certain manager, I understand, to be willing to. That's why I said take a little courage on the part of some of you. Other of you will be a little shy to do this. But I think that would be a growth area to get to if you could, to get to that. Then you do another exercise, the same day, same session, same staff meeting. And you say, now I'd like you to say what you want from each other. Okay? And so they start saying what it is, you put it on a flip chart or whatever it is. You collapse those that are fuzzy and overlap. So you have pretty well good, distinct categories. And you say, okay, if this is what we want from each other, are you committed to giving that to each other? How much commitment do we have? Mary, what is your commitment? 100%? 60? 70? Well, I'll commit if other people do. You know, that kind of thing. You work all this out, and then you say to them, in 6 months, I'm going to also have a sheet of paper where you will evaluate each other on the things you said matter to you, right? It's not what matters to me now, it's you said matters to you. And I'll give you each the evaluation your team members have of you so that you can grow just like I'm willing to grow. This takes courage. But there is no growth without some degree of courage, no matter what it is. And hard work, right? Generally speaking. No real growth without some courage. And this is mere suggestion. But I didn't want to end without having you go away with no ideas about where you might go after you leave here, right? I may overwhelm you with it all, but I won't have left you with none. To serve the needs and wants of our customers, then of course you can do the things we've already talked about, identify customer needs and wants. That's the easy part. That's why I dwelled on the first two, because that's getting a little too personal. But this part is clear. I can move straight on from there. How do we put ourselves in our customers' shoes? And then finally, down here for the overall success of the organization, how can we enhance the goal of Northern Nevada Medical Center to create the best possible patient and guest experience? That is your organization's overall goal. So you haven't finished your process with your team until you have linked what they want to do to the overall experience of the organization and where the organization is trying to go. And the example that I used today, of course, was one department leading the way in a Vista hospital. With that, we have reached lunchtime, and we'll come back, and Meg will have one exercise before we go. And I want to, if I don't get to say it again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I appreciate it very much how warm you've all been. Thank you.